For decades, the Loch Ness Monster has captivated scientists, skeptics and believers alike. But is Nessie a relic of prehistory, or simply the world's greatest illusion? Let's find out in this week's episode of The Inexplicable. Hello and welcome back to the Inexplicable podcast, the only place in the known universe where leaving with more questions than answers means you're heading in the right direction. Today, as you can see by the title, we're going to be looking at one of, if not the most famous cryptids alongside none other than Bigfoot himself. This Loch Ness Monster legend is sort of a gateway into cryptozoology for a lot of people, and I know it was for me. I remember being a kid watching the movie The Water Horse, reading about the Loch Ness Monster, and it's one of those things that kind of gets your foot in the door with a lot of these things because there's a lot of lore and mystique surrounding it. So in today's episode, I'm just going to ask some questions about it. What is real? What is not? What is propaganda and media sensationalism? Is there any real evidence? Or are we going to debunk this legend? So, without further ado, this is the legend of the Loch Ness Monster. The earliest existing account that we have of the Loch Ness Monster, or something that sounds like it, is the St. Columba and the Water Beast from the 6th century. The St. Columba and the Water Beast story goes like this. It was around 565 AD. The source of it was the book Life of St. Columba by Adomnan, written about 100 years later after the story. It's set in the River Ness, which flows out of Loch Ness, Scotland, so not actually the loch, but just downstream from it essentially. The story goes as follows. Columba saw locals burying a man killed by a water beast, supposedly. He sent one of his followers to swim across the river to fetch a boat. Then the water beast appeared and charged at the swimmer. Columba made the sign of the cross and commanded it to stop. "Go no further," he shouted. The creature instantly retreated, and the onlookers praised Columba's divine power. This is the earliest written mention of a strange creature in the Loch Ness area. The River Ness is obviously directly linked to the loch in question, so later generations kind of connected the stories, as you can imagine. The story describes a large aquatic creature attacking a swimmer, similar, of course, to the modern day Nessie tales. The story with this is, the story itself is quite compelling in terms of linking it to the modern day Loch Ness Monster. However, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt given the context of the story being written. Now, St. Columba was obviously a saint or considered a saint, so this is more than likely a Christian miracle story, symbolizing more faith versus evil and good and bad and being against paganism. It was quite rife back in the day to make up stories and put extra praise on saints and stuff. There's a lot of saint stories that historically are just inaccurate, but they serve a purpose or they serve as just extra praise for the person. So you have to take that into mind. This story is often cited as the first recorded encounter of the Loch Ness Monster. But like I said, I don't put too much weight behind this given the context of the story. Another vital piece of evidence in the Loch Ness Monster story is the 1934 photograph known as the surgeon's photograph. It was taken on April 19th, 1934, and it was published in the Daily Mail newspaper. The picture claimed to show the head and long neck of the Loch Ness Monster emerging from the water. It quickly became one of the most infamous images of Nessie, and one of the most iconic cryptid photos ever. So who took the photo? Supposedly by Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson, a respected London surgeon. Wilson didn't want his name directly attached, saying he didn't want to risk his reputation, hence it became known as the surgeon's photograph. The image, as you can imagine, sparked global fascination with the Loch Ness Monster. Newspapers around the world reprinted it and posted it, fueling tourism and investigations at Loch Ness. For decades, it was considered the best proof we have of Nessie's existence. It wasn't until 60 years later, in 1994, that evidence surfaced that the photo was actually a hoax. Investigations by researchers David Martin and Alistair Boyd revealed the monster was actually a small toy submarine with a crafted head and neck attached. The model was built by Christian Sperling, the stepson of Marmaduke Wetherell. Wetherell had been embarrassed by the Daily Mail after his earlier Nessie footprint discovery was proven fake, so this was revenge. They asked Wilson, a trusted man, to submit the photo to make it appear more credible. Even after the photo was exposed, the photo remains iconic to this day, often used to symbolise the mystery of Loch Ness. It highlights how media, deception, and belief intertwined to create the Nessie phenomenon. The surgeon's photograph transformed a local legend into a global mystery, one that still captivates people today. Some people also believe that the Loch Ness Monster is based upon Scottish folklore creatures, the first one being something known as the Kelpie. This is a shape-shifting water spirit that often appears as a beautiful horse. It lives in the Scottish lochs and rivers, especially Loch Ness and Loch Morar. The behaviour of the Kelpie, it sort of lures people, often children, onto its back and then plunges into the water to drown and devour them. It can sometimes appear as human, but always shows a telltale sign of waterweed in its hair. Now, how does this connect to Nessie? Early stories of strange creatures in Loch Ness may have evolved from the Kelpie tales, is what some people think. Both represent the same thing, which is the mysterious forces of the deep, beautiful, dangerous, and unknowing depth in the water. The other creature in Scottish folklore that people think the Loch Ness Monster is drawing upon is something known as the water horse. Even more dangerous than the Kelpie, the water horse is known to eat its victims entirely, leaving only the liver on the shore. It's associated with the remote lochs in the Highlands, similar to Loch Ness. Some scholars think Nessie legends are modernised versions of these water horse myths. The word water horse still appears in Loch Ness related media today, like, for example, the Water Horse novel and film by Dick King-Smith. This just shows how the media attention transformed a local tale into an international mystery. So they're kind of the things that the Loch Ness legend is drawing upon, the Scottish folklore influences, the surgeon's photograph, and all these things kind of added fuel to the fire. Now you pair that with the media sensationalism, with the propaganda, with the headlines, and all of a sudden you've turned this, what could have been a log, could have been a toy, into a global mystery. Now, if there's a global mystery, you bet there's going to be people trying to solve it every single day until the mystery is complete. Now, if we want to look at the evidence and the investigations that have been conducted regarding the Loch Ness, there's been quite a few. So, let's start at the beginning. The first major investigation was done in the 1950s to the 70s. These are the sonar sweeps and the underwater photography. During this period, technology was first used to search Loch Ness's deep, murky waters. Several sonar surveys claimed to detect large, moving shapes beneath the surface, sometimes too big to be ordinary fish. Underwater photography missions, like those by the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, produced blurred images that seemed to show fins or flippers, but nothing conclusive. These early efforts helped turn Nessie hunting into a blend of science and spectacle. So, if we're being honest, there was nothing really conclusive found in these studies, but they just added more fuel to the fire, just creating more mystery and more intrigue. So they did probably more to help the legend of Loch Ness or Nessie, rather than actually debunk it. The next major investigation came in 1975, followed by the 1987 expedition. In 1975, an expedition led by the Academy of Applied Sciences used sonar and underwater cameras, reporting images of a large flipper-like object. This was later disputed as debris or image distortion, though. Then, in 1987, Operation Deep Scan, one of the most ambitious searches, involved a line of boats sweeping the entire loch with sonar. The sonar picked up several large, unexplained contacts, moving in the deep water, enough to fuel media headlines, but still lacking verifiable evidence of a living creature. So again, you've got signs of unexplained contacts, but it's very vague. You've got no real concrete evidence there again. So again, it fuels the mystery rather than pointing us in a direction of true or false. It just fuels the mystery, creates more questions and intrigue. Therefore, you can see how the Loch Ness Monster legend has developed over time, where there's these so-called investigations happening every decade, but there's nothing conclusive ever being found, either in favour or against it. Then finally, in 2003, the BBC Sonar project finally gave us some sort of conclusive evidence. The BBC mounted a high-tech, full-lock sonar scan using 600 sonar beams and satellite tracking. The result? No trace of any large animal in Loch Ness. Scientists concluded that if Nessie existed, it would have to be extremely elusive or move between the loch and the sea, something that's not supported by the geography and would be practically impossible to do in those circumstances. The findings suggested that the mystery was more cultural than biological, but public belief still persisted. So even when you've got some sort of conclusive evidence now with the BBC Sonar project, people still don't want to let go of it. And that just speaks to the phenomenon that is when humans get a hold of an idea, they just won't let go of it. So you can imagine someone could sweep the whole loch with sonar and underwater photography and people still won't believe it. People love a conspiracy, and me included. I love a conspiracy too, but when you've had a full sonar sweep of something, best believe there's nothing there. Then the investigations kind of died down for a while because the BBC investigation was pretty conclusive up until 2019 when some DNA analysis was done. Scientists from New Zealand conducted an environmental DNA, eDNA, survey sampling genetic material from the water to identify what species were present. They found no evidence of any large, unknown creature, no reptile or dinosaur DNA, for example. However, they did detect a high amount of eel DNA, leading to the theory that giant eels might explain some sightings. The study showed that modern science can test all legends, but didn't end the fascination still. However, I must say, in my lifetime, the fascination with the Loch Ness Monster has severely declined. I remember when I was a kid, people were absolutely obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster in schools, in books, in movies. And nowadays you don't really hear it mentioned and it's kind of written off. And to be honest, rightfully so. I mean, when you look at the evidence is not strong for it. But overall, I just think people have kind of cottoned on to the idea that there is a lack of evidence and thus it's kind of lost its steam. So, apart from all the investigations I've just mentioned, you've obviously got the eyewitness accounts too. Now, thousands of people claim to have seen something in Loch Ness, often describing a long neck, humps or ripples on the calm water. While some of the reports do share consistent details, many can usually be explained by waves, logs, swimming deer or boat wakes. It's just that the human mind is prone to pattern recognition, seeing meaning in shadows and waves, which can make eyewitness testimony unreliable. It's still compelling. It's just because if you know that there's the legend of the Loch Ness and you're going to the Loch Ness and you say, let's say you see a peculiar wave. Now, to any regular person, that might just be a wave, but to you, that might be the tail of the Loch Ness Monster, you know? There's kind of a confirmation bias where you already want it to be true, so therefore you make it true. And this kind of speaks to the idea that because the Loch Ness is so vast and deep, I mean, it's over 230 meters deep and it's very murky, this gives people a crutch to kind of lean on, where they say that, okay, maybe you've scanned the Loch Ness, but look how deep it is. It could be right at the bottom. You know, so they have that little lifeline to cling on to, where it's like the lake is so vast that it still could be hiding somewhere down there. You know, it's like each new expedition, even when they find nothing, it kind of revives the public interest rather than actually ending it. The monster has become larger than evidence. It's a symbol of wonder, the unknown, the mystery, and you know what? It's an icon for Scotland. So now that we've looked at some of the evidence, why don't we have a look at the theories that people have put forward? Now, some of these theories are a bit more out there than others, but just bear with me and we'll go through each and every one of them. So number 1, to me the most compelling, is the giant eel hypothesis. This is one of the most scientifically grounded theories that we have today. Like I mentioned before, in 2019, a DNA study found no unknown species in the loch, but did detect a large amount of eel DNA. This supports the idea that European eels, which migrate from the Sargasso Sea, may grow unusually large in Loch Ness's cold, deep waters. Giant eels could account for the serpentine movements or dark shapes seen near the surface of the water. However, scientists do note that eels typically don't lift their bodies above water, so while they may explain some of the sightings, they don't fully match the long neck descriptions. So, for me, this is a strong theory for a lot of the sightings. However, the long neck sticking out of the water doesn't really mesh with this, so let's keep going. Next, we have the plesiosaur theory, the most famous and romantic theory that Nessie is a surviving plesiosaur, a marine reptile from the dinosaur era. This was popularized after the 1934 surgeon's photograph, which resembled a creature with a long neck and a small head, which looked a lot like the plesiosaur. This, to be honest with you guys, it's biologically implausible for several reasons. Firstly, the plesiosaurs went extinct around 65 million years ago. They were cold-blooded air breathers, unsuited to the cold, deep loch environment. And lastly, the Loch Ness only formed about 10,000 years ago after the last ice age, long after the plesiosaurs vanished. Still, however, the romantic idea that a dinosaur, a prehistoric dinosaur, survived all this time, of course, fuels imagination, and thus, it's a theory that a lot of people like. The next theory is the seismic gas bubbles and wave patterns. Loch Ness lies on a geological fault line, meaning seismic activity can occasionally release gas bubbles from the lake bed. Now, when these bubbles rise, they can disturb the surface, creating ripples or wakes that look like something moving underwater. Similarly, wind patterns and temperature layers in the loch can produce standing waves, long, smooth undulations easily mistaken for a creature's back. These natural phenomena offer a non-biological explanation for many surface sightings, especially at a distance. For me, I think this makes a lot of sense in terms of the just under the surface sightings and the wave disturbances that people take note of. Obviously, this does not account for the long neck and stuff like that, but I think what you'll find is, and I'll go through this at the end, a lot of these theories work in unison with each other rather than on their own. But regardless, let's keep digging for now. The fourth theory that we're going to go through is the floating logs, optical illusions, and boat wakes. So, submerged logs, particularly from the pine trees around, can absorb water and sink, and they later resurface as they release gas, appearing to rise suddenly like a creature. So you can imagine that these submerged pine tree logs, as they take water in, they get heavier and they begin to sink. Now, when this water is then released and the gas is released, of course they begin to float again. Now, as they come up, they rise quite suddenly. Now, this can look like an animal rearing its long neck, for example. That's quite a good theory, to be honest. Then, obviously, you've got the optical illusions. Now, these are common on Loch Ness and on a lot of lochs in Scotland too, due to its still water, the mist, the shifting lights, just the murkiness of the water, which can cause the reflections to distort ordinary objects into extraordinary shapes. And lastly, the boat wakes. The boat wakes can travel long distances in calm conditions, forming smooth, parallel humps that resemble a serpent's back. And they do look like, if you go online and look at boat wakes in calm conditions, you'll see that in some circumstances they do actually look like a serpent's back. These explanations account for many photos and videos that, under scrutiny, turn out to show ordinary but misleading phenomena. And last but not least, I think the Loch Ness Monster legend has been plagued by hoaxes and deliberate misinformation. So I mean, like, you've got the famous 1934 surgeon's photograph, like I've mentioned, which was later revealed to be a toy submarine hoax. When you've got photos like that, it's hard to kind of decipher what is genuine and what is not. Other hoaxes include fake sonar readings, manipulated photos online. I mean, the internet is rife with fake photos of the Loch Ness Monster. And then you've also got the fabricated eyewitness stories. I mean, everyone wants to be the one to tell the story that they saw something, and this causes a lot of basically BS out there. And like I said, what's interesting about this legend is that each hoax, rather than ending the belief, it tends to kind of just revive the interest and reinforce the place that the Loch Ness Monster has in culture. This circle of mystery kind of debunking and then rediscovery and then belief and disbelief keeps the legend alive long after the evidence fades. I mean, look, let's be real. There's no evidence for the Loch Ness Monster to stand upon, but the legend still persists. And I think, saying that, I think now more than ever, people have lost faith in the Loch Ness Monster legend, and rightfully so. But it still kind of kicks around, and I think it's got kind of grandfather rights into the cryptozoology world, because it is kind of the grandfather of all of this field. But in regards to the actual theories, I think the scientific explanations are the most plausible ones. So I think it's a combination of the eel theory. The eel theory is very compelling. A lot of strong evidence for that. Eels, large giant eels, can look very scary, firstly, and look very strange. So that can account for some of the sightings. Then you've got the logs that rise up. That would account for the long neck sightings. And then you've got the waves and the boat wakes, which cause disturbances on the waves. And then you've got the murkiness of the water, which distorts everything anyway. I think that, for me, is the most sensible conclusion. The balance between skepticism and wonder, like I mentioned, is what keeps the Loch Ness Monster alive. But if we look at it just scientifically, just objectively, I think you'll come to the same conclusion I have, that it can be explained by science. So guys, that was the legend of the Loch Ness Monster. I think we kind of went through everything there, and there is a lot more out there online, but I tried to keep this concise and kind of to the point, because there's a lot of just absolutely rubbish stuff out there, people just making up random theories that are unintelligible, and I didn't want to include that in this. I didn't want this episode to kind of go down that route. I wanted to just kind of assess the real evidence for it, rather than every single conspiracy, you know. But I think the Loch Ness Monster kind of symbolizes the human need to believe in mystery and to believe in legends. It's kind of part of being a human at this point, you know. It's like we need something to believe in, we need something to solve, a mystery to look forward to, you know, that sort of thing. Our imagination is very strong with these sorts of things. But I think when it comes down to it, if you cut to the chase, there's no evidence that the Loch Ness Monster existed. Could there be a strangely large eel? Yes. But the Loch Ness Monster as a plesiosaur or some prehistoric creature, I don't think existed. But if you disagree, feel free to let me know. Drop me an email at inexplicablepod@outlook.com, or DM me, or have a look at the TikTok page, which is at the.inexplicable, and I would be happy to debate you or have a chat with you, and we can just discuss the evidence. Or if you have any other suggestions for episode topics that you'd like, please just leave them in the comments or get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to take a look at it. And with that being said, that is the end of the episode. Thank you guys for listening. Episode 8 will be out in a couple of weeks. I'm not sure what the topic is yet, but I assure you it will be an interesting one. So, till next time guys, peace.